After World War II, a secret army was left behind in Europe, which was run by the CIA. In this clip, Joe Rogan learns about the dark history of Project Gladio for the first time.
I know you know a lot of these CIA operations, like Paperclip, where we bring over people who are working on bioweapons from Japan and from Germany, and we don't prosecute them, and we use them to be the beginning of the U.S. bioweapons program. And I know you know MK Ultra and Mockingbird, but do you know the one called Project Gladio?
No, I do not.
Put your seatbelt on, because this one just tops it all.
The man speaking is Gavin de Becker. He is one of the world's leading experts on threat assessment and the prediction of violence. He is a specialist who advises presidents and protects public figures from hidden dangers. His entire career is built on identifying the patterns that lead to violence.
So this was, World War II ends, and the OSS, which was the CIA at the time, decides to leave behind, rather than take everybody home, all the American soldiers, they're going to leave behind a bunch of them. Hey, you guys, hide your weapons, hide your rifles, secrete all the grenades and ammunition and put it in bunkers, and just sit tight until we have some ideas of things you ought to do.
This was the dawn of the Cold War. The plan was called a stay-behind network. The logic seemed simple. If the Soviet Union invaded Western Europe, these hidden soldiers would instantly become a guerrilla resistance force. They would operate behind enemy lines. They were a secret insurance policy.
So eventually, a few hundred of them stay behind, and they are going to do things in Europe to stop communism, to stop socialism, to fight the Soviets, etc. But what do they actually end up doing is terroristic incidents against our allies. They blow up a train station in Bologna, 285 people injured, 85 people killed, done and funded and operated by our CIA.
This is the critical twist. The Soviet invasion never came. The secret army was never activated against the Red Army. Instead, its weapons and networks were used internally. The Bologna bombing in 1980 was real. 85 people were killed. It was the worst terrorist attack in Italy's post-war history. For decades, it was blamed on neo-fascist terrorists. De Becker is claiming the chain of command went much higher.
They do the 1989 assassination of a guy who's a journalist who's writing about this. They shoot him twice in the head. They do another bombing, 17 people killed. Another one, Oktoberfest in Germany, not Italy, 17 people killed. Why? Because they see that certain candidates are doing well and might become prime ministers, for example, or important legislators. So when you have a big, giant terrorist incident done in some train station, for example, that moves the public toward a more right-leaning government or a more totalitarian government that CIA can deal with, and away from anything where communism can happen.
This tactic has a name, the strategy of tension. The goal is to create chaos and fear. You bomb a public square. You assassinate a political figure. The public panics. They demand law and order at any cost. In their fear, they abandon democracy and embrace a stronger, more authoritarian government. It is the weaponization of public fear to achieve a political goal.
There's the assassination of Aldo Moro. He was a former prime minister, 5 bodyguards. They're all killed. He's kidnapped. A few weeks later, he's shot in the head and put in the trunk of a car. That was done by Project Gladio. In other words, these things were done by the United States to our supposed allies. And hundreds of these leave-behinds operated eventually a 20,000-person army all over Europe. Now, I don't expect anybody to believe a word of it. You got to go to Wikipedia and put in Gladio. It's just one D. And you see that this insanity is true.
Aldo Moro was a 5-time prime minister of Italy. His great sin was not being a communist. It was his attempt to bring the Italian Communist Party into the government coalition. This historic compromise was seen as a direct threat by Washington. He was kidnapped, and his 5 bodyguards were killed. His body was found in the trunk of a car 55 days later. The official story blamed a far-left group, but the questions about deeper involvement have never gone away.
The punchline on it for me, the one that really blows it out of the water, is that it ended in 1990.
Whoa.
Yeah. And George Bush was president, and he'd been former director of CIA, of course, and he denies it like crazy, but eventually an Italian prime minister really goes to the mat on it. And it becomes so well established that the U.S. government funded and managed these operations, blowing up regular citizens in Europe, that a lot of the people who were imprisoned for them, for those incidents, terrorists, terrorist groups, et cetera, were released on the defense that it was actually done by CIA. I did tell you to put your seatbelt on.
Oh my God.
This is what separates Gladio from an historical footnote. It didn't end in the 1950s or 60s. It was active for over 40 years. It continued long after the initial threat of a Soviet invasion had faded. When the operation was finally exposed in 1990, the scandal was so large it brought down the Italian government. Italian courts eventually acknowledged the role of these secret services, leading to the re-examination of decades of political violence.
Is that just like an idea that starts off as a precautionary measure that just got completely out of hand because there was no oversight?
When governments, big centralized governments and other power centers become, without oversight, and where does oversight come from? It comes from us, the public, having to be skeptical. And if the public is not skeptical, if they'll buy a story like, oh, a terrible terrorist group assassinated this guy, Aldo Moro, how terrible, and they'll buy the story with no skepticism because that's what we're told, then there will be no oversight, and power centers, it's no surprise, we could talk about every country on earth. I'm not, I happen to love America, but I'm not saying it's just America. It's, this is the nature of espionage and the nature of war. But I want to answer your question about, is it just because of no oversight? The United States doesn't end wars very often. For example, World War II ends, and you're all excited about it, and you're mounting things, and you're doing all this stuff. And then it ends. And everybody's like, hey, but we were really into this thing. And so we don't let them end. We leave 300,000 troops in Germany, 300,000 troops in Japan, hundreds of thousands of troops in South Korea. Why don't we bring these people home? If the war's over, the war's over. But that's not how empire works.
This is the final connection. The stay-behind army wasn't just a forgotten tool from a previous war. It was a symptom of a larger pattern, a nation that builds an infrastructure for war and then never tears it down. The declared conflicts end, but the bases, the troops, and the secret networks remain. They simply find new missions.
And so the U.S. Tends to, continue these wars in the versions I just described to you, which is more secret versions. And it's dark, man. I mean, if somebody, and maybe somebody has, but if somebody came into America and did a bunch of terrorist incidents in America that killed a lot of Americans, oh, geez, let's reflect on whether that's ever happened. But anyway, if that happened, we'd be stressed.
The story of Operation Gladio is more than a dark chapter of history. It's a case study in how the tools built to protect a democracy can be turned against it. It forces a question. In the name of stopping a foreign enemy, what lines can be crossed? And if a government secretly uses fear as a weapon against its own people, who is the real enemy?